you again for joining us this morning for our wonderful webinar with Dr. Haveman. We're very excited to hear from him and to have him join us with the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership speaking to us. Please do take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to see and hear from you and hear where everybody's represented from, which county, what organization you're with. That also gives us a good idea of the audience. And also, if you have questions for Dr. Haveman, please do drop them in the chat, and we will hold our questions to the end of his presentation, and then we will get to the questions. And we have a short 1 hour together, but I do hope we'll get through as many questions as possible. Again, thank you so much. My name is Tara Garay. I'm the President CEO of the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. John Haveman, who's widely considered to be one of California's leading experts on the economics of seaports, good movements, and international trade policy. I think it's a great treat that he's been able to join us again, and he's a friend of the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Haveman, for joining us. He is also an expert in regional economies and local economic development. Prior to joining the Marin Consulting, Dr. Haveman was a chief economist at the Bay Area Council of Economics, the Economic Institute, a founding principal of Beacon Economics, and the director of economy program at the Public Policy Institute of California. He has been a senior economist with the President's Council of Economic Advisors and an economist with the Federal Trade Commission. He has held several faculty positions and is widely published. All this to say, it's a special treat to have him back. He was with us at the Economic Outlook a few months back in May, actually, as a matter of fact. And as promised, he said he would come back and join us again and share the information and the latest information that's coming out from the economic data and the economic insights. You know, as we were chatting a little bit earlier, and many of you that I am noting on the chat here, we are certainly living in uncertain times, and I'm sure many of us are getting tired of using the word uncertain. But I think the more information we have, the more we're armed with, that helps us to make the decisions for our own families, our companies, and within the region. It gives us better understanding, a better handle. All that to say, without further ado, again, I thank you all for joining us this morning, and I will kick it off to Dr. John Haveman. Thank you again for being here.
Okay, thank you, Tara, for inviting me back. Let me see if I can get my screen shared. Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, again, thanks for having me back, and thanks everybody for coming back. I originally started out trying to prepare this talk, just thinking about data that was in the May 1st talk that I gave and what gets updated. But I've sort of spilled over into other areas, and there'll be some new data as well, because it's only been 2 months, less than 2 months. But still things have changed pretty significantly. We've got some population updates. And I'm going to talk a little bit about personal income and the implications of some of the labor exodus from the region towards the end. I think that's new from the May presentation. But anyway, let's get started. Talk about some economic indicators. Big picture, as Tara was saying, is uncertainty. And we've added a little more uncertainty over the weekend. It seems to be just what we do these days, which Tara and I were talking about. It would be really unfortunate if that becomes the new normal. So hopefully we can bring things back to what was the old normal pretty soon. So in terms of economic indicators, and a lot of this will be very familiar for those of you that were at the May 1st presentation. I want to go through GDP growth just a little bit. It has changed since May 1st. There are 3 different releases for every quarter. There's a first release, second release, and then a final release of the data. And this is the second release. When I talked to you about it earlier, I think GDP in the first quarter of 2025 was down 0.3. The revision has it down 0.2. The story hasn't changed really. The story is primarily that imports, right? Everybody was trying to import ahead of the tariffs. And ahead of what tariffs? And honestly, it's not even clear to me exactly what tariffs we have in place now. There's been so much backing and forthing with tariffs, which is kind of good, but it's uncertain. I had real fears about what the tariffs were ultimately going to do to the economy. But I think that I'm getting a little bit more sanguine about it, in that we won't actually have this massive tariff regime that was was projected. Um, Right, so it was all decline was all because of imports. Decline in GDP would have been bigger, but those imports get put in a warehouse. They show up in investment as an increase in inventories. GDP growth normally about 2.3%. I'm sorry, consumption growth normally about 2.3%, and it's just zero point 0.8. So we'll talk a little bit about more about consumers than we did previously. If we look at investment, right here is on the right-hand side, that's inventories. This normal number is normally about zero. And that was big. So we imported a bunch of stuff. It's sitting around waiting for people to buy it. Which does not portend great things for Q2, because instead of producing things, people will be selling out of inventories. So the Q2 numbers coming out a little bit more than a month from now will be really interesting and I think important. But again, if it is negative growth in Q2, I'm not certain that's indicative of a recession. We'll have 2 quarters of negative growth. That's a shorthand for recession. No economist goes by that. I'm still going to remain more sanguine than I was on May 1st about our possibility of staying out of recession. Government spending, in particular defense spending, was down. Consumers tightened up. Increase or the contribution to GDP growth of purchases of goods, roughly zero, marginally positive. Still buying services, getting haircuts, and going to the movies and whatnot. That's about zero point 0.8 normally. This is retail sales. There are 2 lines on here. Hard to see the second one. The first one is maroon, and that's inflation adjusted retail sales since the onset of the pandemic. There's the yellow line, which is my forecast trend. That is, if had you asked me before the pandemic, what did I think was going to happen to retail sales, that would have been my estimate. Right. So we had this enormous bump up in retail sales. A lot of people buying stuff and not services through the pandemic. In the recovery from the pandemic, though, retail sales have been pretty sluggish. And I didn't anticipate real growth in retail sales. But the downturn in the last couple of months here, right? This is through May, and that is suggesting that retail sales are softening. The first part of 2025 has been relatively soft. We can take a look at that a little bit. I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but on the left-hand side, we've got the change in retail sales between January and May of this year. The top line is the total change, about 0.6%. That is 1 quarter of the year. So if we multiply that by 3, we get about a 1.8% increase in retail sales, and that's pretty slow. Retail sales would normally increase over 2.5 to 3%. So retail sales growth is slow. Over on the right-hand side is just the change from April to May. Significant decline from April to May in that total line. Significant declines in purchases of gas. Building supplies are significantly down, and that's a little troubling, especially for the MBEP region to the extent it applies there. I mean, that suggests that the building of residences may be slowing. And then we've got motor vehicles. I think a lot of people, bought motor vehicles before leaning into the tariffs, and so motor vehicle sales in April between change from April to May was pretty slow. Um, Online sales are increasing. Furniture still up a little bit, but again, a little troubling the decline from April to May. But it is just 1 month, a little bit more. Meaningful is the change from January through May, which again is also relatively slow. Changes in employment. This has been updated through May. In about 2 weeks, we'll get June. And these numbers continue to surprise me. I expect them to be softer than they have been. But 147,000 jobs created in April, 139,000 jobs created in May, both exceeded my expectations. Which I'm not sure what to make of it all. But the economy seems to be continuing to be on the stronger side in terms of job creation. Important, I think I put this slide up before. is that most of the job growth has been among the foreign-born population. Right, so the maroon line here, both of these lines, the maroon and the blue line, they're indexed to February 2020 equals 100. And so the endpoint of the maroon line at 114, that's telling us that employment among the foreign-born population increased by about 14%. That was an increase in 3.9 million jobs for those foreign-born. It's been declining in the last couple of months, and I imagine that it will continue to decline going forward. The blue line is employment of the native-born population, and that was at 101.2. That indicates a 1.2% increase since before the pandemic, which is just 1.5 million jobs. Right, so two-thirds of the jobs that we've grown since before the pandemic have been among the foreign-born population. I think emphasizing the importance of immigration for our economy. Um, this slide is new, and it shows the changes in federal government employment. The red vertical line there is roughly Inauguration Day, and so the four red bars going down point to changes in federal government employment that have been brought about by President Trump and Doge. Numbers not as big as I had expected them to be. We've been hearing about hundreds of thousands of people laid off, and it doesn't show up in the data, which suggests that that's not exactly what's happening, or more with people who are being called back, those who have been laid off than I would have thought. Not small. In April, I'm sorry, in May, more than 20,000 workers were left. So that's about 60,000 workers in total, out of about 3 million. So it's a small change, but if sustained, could bring about meaningful decline in government employment, which is not a good thing. A lot of the people who are leaving are just they carry with them a ton of expertise, institutional knowledge, if you will. And if we do start hiring people back, it's not going to be the best that we're going to be able to get back because they will have situated themselves a little bit more someplace more stable and probably higher paying. So the best of the laid off will be a struggle to get back, which is unfortunate. Stocks have largely rebounded. When I presented last time, they were down about 10%. Now they're down a couple of percentage points, starting to hover again just below where they were on Inauguration Day. So still down significantly relative to what we might have expected. We might have expected, something between a 7-8% increase from Inauguration Day, but we have not seen that. Instead, a small decline terms of inflation, not a lot has changed with respect to inflation, which surprises me. That only suggests to me that the tariffs that have been imposed, it's going to take a little bit longer for them to show up as price increases. Price increases haven't really hit through May. I do still expect that we will see inflation as a result of the tariffs, also inflation as a result of the immigration. If you look, so this is the consumer price index. This is the one that gets all of the big flashy headlines when it comes out. It is not the one that the Federal Reserve pays attention to. Federal Reserve pays attention to the personal consumption expenditure price index. And that one in April May should come out in a week or so. But through April, it's at 2.1%. So it is certainly suggesting that the Federal Reserve's job is done, and it has brought inflation back down to its target. 0.1, not very far away from two. I'm sorry, 2.1, not very far away from 2.0. That said, and I'll talk about this in a minute, I don't expect the Fed to lower interest rates anytime soon. Egg prices, they're coming down. I know President Trump talks about this from time to time. They're down from a peak of a little bit over 6, so that's significant decline, but they're still pretty elevated. Usually they're in the sort of $2 range, so they're still up 100%. In terms of the Fed is being reasonably conservative. It has not changed rates since May 1st. Just last week, they held rates steady again. Their next FOMC meeting is July 29 to 30. I will be surprised if they lower rates July 29 and 30, but if there is no change in inflation, if inflation stays the course for the next month, it is possible that we might see them sticking their toes in the water. I kind of hope that they don't because I think that we're going to need rates to stay high, but they may well dip their toes in and drop it maybe a quarter of a percent or 25 basis points. Is a recession on the horizon? I'm getting less and less concerned. The economy seems to be holding up better than I had expected. Lots of indicators are in the black. Again, Q1 GDP being negative, almost meaningless. I think Q2 is unlikely to be negative, but it is. If it is, I'm not willing to say that that really portends big trouble. Not to say that there isn't big trouble out there. As we talked at the beginning, uncertainties abound, right? Uncertainties abound. There are all the federal government policies. How far will they go with immigration? I think over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've been starting to get a better sense of how far they will go with immigration. What's happening in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, throughout our state and all over the country, is deeply troubling, not only from an economic perspective, I think. How many federal employees will be laid off? Again, we talked about it. It's not as many as I had thought would show up in the data. Again, how high will tariffs remain? I'm sure most of well, let's not go into that. I was going to go to the taco thing, but let's not talk about that. What's going to happen with tariffs? I do not know. I think legitimately you could argue that they will go up, or you could argue that they will go down. There's been a little bit more talk. I think President Trump is getting a little bit more anxious to relieve Fed Chair Powell of his duties. I hope that doesn't happen. But then there's the great distraction over the weekend. What will happen in the Middle East? I was really optimistic when Iran's retaliation for our bombing was pretty mild. But it seems that Iran and Israel have been violating the ceasefire. And if that continues to happen, then, well, just more uncertainties. We look again, a little bit of bigger picture: deportations, tariffs, cuts to federal spending, threats to Fed Chair Powell. Let me put up this new graph that is very relevant for the immigration conversation. The projection that I had on May 1st about our demographic outlook was that natural population growth was going to become negative sometime in the early 2040s. Well, the CBO recently changed its projection, so now population growth from the native population is going to happen. It's going to turn negative in the early 2030s, about a decade sooner, right? And this is important for the economy. If we are going to grow the economy, right, as I mentioned in May 1st, there are three different ways to grow the economy. One is to invest in new capital equipment. We're doing a little bit less of that. Number two is to invest in new technology. I think there's a lot of that going on. We could have a long conversation about AI. And the third is by increasing the labor supply, right? And if we do cut off immigration significantly, we're going to be reducing the labor supply, and we cannot rely on the native-born population to backfill. Right? It's not like there's this enormous supply of native-born individuals who want those jobs. Partly, the native-born population doesn't want those jobs because they are, well, low-paying, they are hard, and they're undesirable. So we need the immigrants. This increase, or the bringing forward of the date when the native population turns negative really does have me concerned about the long-term economic prospects in the United States if we do not bring in immigrants. And I think, again, the right way to do that is not just to open the border. The right way to do that is to say, okay, we've got this rough cap of about 1 million authorized immigrants every year. Well, let's just open that up, right? We have significant labor needs in this country, and that's one way to fill them. Right? There's a whole movement to start having people to have more babies, but that's going to take about 18 years before they become, well, 16 years before they become a real increase in the labor force. So labor immigration can play a really significant role there. I was, working with a bunch of data in preparing for this morning, and I managed to put together some data on farm employment in the MBEP region. And it's not great. If you look on the left-hand side, there's for some reason over the course of the last year or so, a really dramatic increase in farm employment. But looking just over the course of the last few months, there's been significant decline. Peak in farm employment was in January. These are seasonally adjusted data. So there have been declines in February, March, and April relative to January. And so those are declines on a seasonally adjusted basis relative to what we would expect. And I don't know for sure, but my interpretation of this, I'm not a farm expert, and if somebody out there is and would like to set me straight or let me know that I'm on the wrong track, I would have expected farm employment to increase from January to April. And instead, we're getting a decrease. And my strong suspicion is that that is a result of deportations, right? It's both self-deportations and mandated deportations. I think that the labor supply in the farm sector is in decline, and that's a problem for the MBEP region. So let me summarize a little bit of this. Inflation is close to the Fed's target, but a little stubborn. I think it's likely to change. It's going to go up. I know I said that 2 months ago, but at some point, if these tariffs remain, prices will go up. Current immigration and trade policies are going to be problematic for inflation. Immigration, right, deportations, they're a tax on the economy and they are expensive. Many ag workers are unauthorized immigrants. I don't know about the MBEP region, but I know in the Central Valley, statistics indicate that about 50% of the farm workers are unauthorized immigrants. And tariffs, they're a tax, right? They're going to cost jobs. They're going to raise prices. They're going to be problematic for the economy. Uncertainty, right? Nobody knows how to plan into uncertainty. Business investment is particularly at risk. And I think a lot of business investment coming from overseas. We've been seeing an odd phenomena as there's turmoil in the U.S. stock market. Normally, people run to safety and they run to treasuries. They haven't been running to treasuries as stock prices have gone down. Interest rates on treasuries have gone up, so people are running elsewhere. One place people seem to be running, which defies understanding. If you're running away from uncertainty, they're running to cryptocurrencies, and I don't. Uncertainty abounds there as well. But also a lot of investment is going to stop coming into the U.S. It's going to take place in other countries where certainty is more of a positive force. Nobody increases spending into uncertainty on an individual basis. I know that I certainly don't. Other countries, right? As I mentioned, going to look elsewhere. Tourists already are. And the outlook, I was thinking about revising this, but I think I'm going to let it stand. I don't think the outlook is particularly good. My position has softened because I think the policies, not immigration necessarily, but trade policies, have become less of a threat. Still a threat, but less of one. So I'm a little bit more sanguine, but I still think we're going to have some slowness going forward. Are we headed for a recession? Uncertain. Lots of forecasters are reducing their forecast for growth. A slowdown in economic growth seems inevitable. As I mentioned, we might see negative growth in Q2, but I think it will probably just be low and positive. About a stagflation, right? We're in a situation where growth is not gonna really happen in a serious way, and inflation is probably going to go up. So we're going to see that word stagflation. I don't know when. I would have expected it to start already, but probably over the next couple of months. Locally. What's changed locally? This is the same graph that I put up before. It's manufacturing. These are GDP changes between 2019 and 2023. We won't get 24 GDP by county or regional U.S. until December, so couldn't update this. But manufacturing has looked pretty good through 23, and leisure and hospitality, significant growth there as well. Where we do have some updated data is on total employment there on the left-hand side. Total employment is up a little bit the last couple of months. On the right-hand side is just non-farm employment, and we'll look a little bit more carefully at non-farm employment in just a minute. But first, we can look at all sorts of different sectors. These are updated. The data previously was 2024 through Q3. This is 2024 through Q4. And so most strikingly, the change is in the agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting category, which declined as a share of employment from 24.5% in the region down to 18.5%. This doesn't trouble me deeply as we're going from Q3 to Q4. My perhaps naive expectation would be that employment in the farm sector would drop a bit there, and so we've seen some increases in other parts of the economy on a share basis, in particular leisure and hospitality. That share increased. If we look at employment growth, this is 2019 Q4 through 2024 Q4. And we've seen there are significant changes. The growth in manufacturing during that time period, much weaker. It was a couple of percent through Q3. Growth in information sector has gotten significantly stronger, and declines, I didn't highlight, but declines in finance and insurance over here just to the right of information. Those declines have increased. So the picture for manufacturing, the picture for finance insurance has gotten less good. Overall, growth during that time period, during that 5-year time period, is negative. It was positive through Q3, so there's a little bit more weakness overall. If we look at employment in the constituent counties, the picture is pretty good. The data that I had previously was through February. This is updated through April. Last couple of months of employment growth in Monterey County, a little bit slower than previously, but still it's employment growth. And on the right-hand side, we're still getting labor force growth as well. Employment growth in Monterey County now better than in the United States as a whole, certainly better than Canada, yeah, California as a whole. And labor force growth in Monterey County doing pretty well relative to California. In San Benito County, story is much the same. Had a couple of months of good employment growth and good labor force growth. In Santa Cruz County, pardon me, is much the same. Although the recovery in Santa Cruz County still has a long way to go before it catches up to even California, let alone the United States as a whole. So of the three counties, there are good signs in Santa Cruz, but still employment recovery is very slow. I wanted to repeat the employment forecast from the Department of Transportation. This is getting a little dated now, because it's 2023, but I think that the general picture is probably the same, and it's fairly sanguine about the long-term prospects for employment growth. And from the Department of Finance, this is the same population forecast that I put up before, just to emphasize that all is not lost. I agree with these forecasts. I don't think the region is headed into some massive downward spiral, even though the last couple of years we've been seeing negative growth. In terms of local population change, these are now through 2025. I've also adjusted the indexing, so it's referencing the numbers on the right hand side at the end of each line reference relative to 2019. Right, so in the MBEP region, population in January of this year was down about 0.8%. In California, down about 0.4%. Population growth within the region very uneven. San Benito County has been growing. I don't know if that's just a lot of people seeking out a lot of space in the pandemic and post-pandemic world. Space does abound in San Benito County. And population down over 3% in Santa Cruz County, down just 0.6% in Monterey County. So population declines. And we are seeing some home price declines as well. Monterey County, the blue line in there, right, is dipping just a little bit. Santa Cruz County is in a downward trend. Let's see, there's Santa Cruz County, Monterey, and San Benito counties. San Benito in there just has been a little bit more of a sustained downward trend. And then the U.S. is still on an upward trend, right? So home prices in the region are perhaps reflecting what's going on with overall population growth. Um, related to population growth, and this is new data that I'm bringing to bear on the MBEP region. This is per capita personal income, and basically what this is doing is it's saying, okay, let's take all of the income that's generated in the region, and what happens to it on a per person basis, and so the blue line over on the left-hand side, the blue line is the MBEP region. You can see, massive uptick in the MBEP region, the red line California, and the green line the United States, largely because of all of the stimulus money that came into the region. That fell off. And now growth is probably something resembling long-term trend in the 2022 to 2023 period. Right. On the right-hand side, this is showing you MBEP per capita income growth. The first set of bars is over the last year. The second set of bars is over 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. Again, blue is MBEP, red is California, green is the United States. And you can see that over the course of the last year, 2022 to 2023, per capita income growth was pretty strong in the MBEP region relative to California and the United States, whereas sort of historically it's been a little bit slower. What about the constituent counties? Right, this is Monterey County. Monterey County, has historically been relatively slow, and not much change. Maybe a little bit faster relative to growth in California and the United States than we might have expected, but still less than in each region. So that's not what's driving the increase in the MBEP region. Instead, it's Santa Cruz County. Right. If you go back 10 years and 15 years, Santa Cruz County has always exceeded the pace of growth for California and the United States just a little bit. Over the course of the last 1 and 5 years, we've seen significant growth in per capita income in Santa Cruz County. San Benito County, much the same story, although particularly rapid growth over the course of the last year. And on average over the last 15 years, slow relative to California and the United States. Right. Okay, so that's per capita income. And I was all ready to tell, a very positive story. And I'm not saying this story isn't positive, but it's tainted just a little bit. Um, so let's go back to the MBEP region. This is the average growth over the 1 year, 5, 10, and 15 that I showed you before. Same graph that you saw before. 5 years, growth about the same as California. Last year, up a little bit. If we look at growth in personal income, this is aggregate personal income, not dividing by population, right? We see a different story. We see that the personal income, just over the course of the 2022 to 23 period, personal income grew, but it grew more slowly in the MBEP region than it did in California, and California grew more slowly than it did in the United States as a whole. Right, so we've got the overall pie shrinking, and since the overall pie is shrinking and per capita income is shrinking when we divide it by population, that means that population is also shrinking. And in a minute, I'll show you the pattern of that shrinkage. But first, let's look at the three different counties. Right here is Monterey County. Already it's been below California, but if we look at personal income, the size of the pie, its growth is positive, but slower still relative to California. If we look at San Benito County, it's amazing growth, 22 to 23, and we do see lots of growth in personal income. Right, so there have been significant flows of people into San Benito County, which we already saw, and they are higher income. They're bringing with them higher levels of income. So it is a good story in San Benito County. A little bit less so for Santa Cruz County, right? Then the left-hand side, that's the graph that I showed you before, showed lots of growth over the course of the last 5 years. However, adjusting for the size of the pie, the size of the pie has been growing, but more slowly in California and the United States, in Santa Cruz County, in 2 of the 3 MBEP counties. This is the migration. I think the one I showed you, the graph on the left, I showed you on May 1st. The graph on the right, regrettably, only goes through 2023. But this is net migration for those with income individual income between 25,000 and 75,000. If we go below 25,000, interestingly enough, we find that there is a net in migration to the region, which is surprising. And that probably and partly accounts for the increasing poverty rates that I mentioned on May 1st. But this is sort of mid to lower income working individuals. And there has been the green line, a net exodus of those individuals from the MBEP region since about 2015, right? If we look at those above 75,000, there's a net increase, a net migration into the region among those two. So it's really at the really low end, there are people coming into the region. In the mid range, there are people leaving the region, and at the high range, there are people again coming into the region. All right, so but a net population loss, shrinking size of the pie, shrinking size of income, growing income per capita because the migration is amongst the mid and not the high income folks. Right. So the story is high growth in per capita income, low growth in the overall pie, largely because of the outmigration of those in sort of the middle to bottom range of the income distribution. Right. So to summarize a little bit, home prices have returned to trend growth, but maybe slipping a little bit along with slipping population growth. Aging population going to require in-migration to grow the local economy. And we're not getting in-migration in the category in the region that we might be, at some level most interested in, right? We're getting growth and higher income, not growth in the middle. In the middle is really what we need more of, both to sustain farming and to provide services to the higher income individuals that are coming into the region. Employment recovery does seem to be picking up pace. The growth in manufacturing and information, it's still there, but it's a little bit less than it was when I talked on May. Deportations. The data that I found about for the county, pretty slim, pretty slim. I had to go back to 2019 and showed about 83,000 unauthorized immigrants in the region. And given where lots of immigration raids are happening, I worry that that's going to be a strong target. Per capita income is rising, but that is driven by the exodus of lower income residents. No doubt seeking a cheaper place to live. Okay, that's what I have. Here's my contact information. I will be sharing these slides with Jessica and Tara, a link to them on Need's website, and hopefully they can share them with all of you. I encourage you to go download them because there are lots of what I call bonus slides in here that I don't have time to talk about, but they are all updated. So for now, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll turn to the Q&A. So the first Q&A is from Kevin Dayton. When the slide was shown at the May 2025 Regional Economic Outlook showing the increase in manufacturing jobs, people were wondering what that could be, as the Monterey area is not a manufacturing um, center. Could that all be Joby? I don't know. If there's anybody in particular, Tara, who can lend any insight into that, that would be terrific.
Good morning. Again, thank you, Dr. Haveman. That was really great presentation, so we appreciate that and some insights. So Kevin, to your question, yes, that's largely Joby Aerospace jobs related to advanced air mobility, drone technologies, and ag tech. Some of it's also food processing and food packaging. Some would some of those jobs fall into that particular category as well. Joby, which is headquartered in Santa Cruz, but does a lot of their R&D and manufacturing in Monterey, so it's straddling both counties, has brought in significant number of manufacturing jobs and continues to do so. Let's see.
I think that answers Kevin's second question as well. Could some of it be ag tech? It sounds like some of it probably is.
Yes, definitely. And then the final question, there's another one on forecasting what to expect on rate of residential rents within our region going up.
Yeah, so I think it depends on sort of what rent category you're in. The people who make $25,000 to $75,000 a year are in a different rent category than those who, make upwards of $100,000 to $200,000 a year. So I would really expect That if you could, if the data, and I don't have those data, but if you could separate out into the different sort of categories, you would find that rents at the high end are likely to go up. Rents at the low end likely to go down, if anything.
We welcome more questions. If folks want to drop them in the chat, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So predictions on the cost of oil and gas, as much as President does, Trump doesn't like it, I think we're going to see gas prices go up. How long that happens, it really depends. Back to uncertainty. I'm optimistic about things in the Middle East. I'm optimistic that Iran and Israel will kind of settle down. Um, but, but who knows? I know at one point Iran was threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz. That happens, and we've got big trouble. I don't think that that's their posture anymore. So I'm hopeful that we'll see a little uptick, but that prices will come back down to their previous trend. But I'm a, a military analyst, a political analyst that's needed to answer this question. I am not. So I'm hopeful and optimistic, but I'm just a guy that maybe has a little more insight than the average bear, but not a whole lot more. Bond market and the effect on borrowing costs for businesses. Um, yeah, it all depends, right? But bond markets, and if you're thinking, I think the borrowing costs may well go up, right? Going into uncertainty, any particular investment that a company wants to head into is going to have a little bit more uncertainty. And so if some you're going to be lending your money to businesses to invest, lending your money to the federal government, going to be a little bit more skeptical. It's going to be a little bit harder to raise funds for the time being. And it's going to take a real decline in the uncertainty of the environment for interest rates to come down and settle down to a level that will be more pro-growth. Um, let's see. James said, I mentioned the investments in AI. How do I see AI advances impacting the economy and especially the workforce? Well, I worry. I worry a lot about AI. I worry that over the course of the next 5 years or so, it may be very disruptive. Um, AI just, yeah, it's amazing, right? If you go in and you look at AI and the things that can do, it's amazing, but it doesn't do everything all that well. There are serious problems with AI. And so my worry for the short term, for the next, 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, is that companies will aggressively lay people off and start implementing AI. You've seen a lot of companies taking that posture. Yep, all our growth is going to be AI. We're not going to hire more people. Um, and I worry that they're going to find, oh, AI just doesn't do it as well as people do yet. And so then maybe they'll go try to bring people back. And as with the federal government, once you shed people, if they're gone long enough, hard to bring them back. So you lose a lot of institutional knowledge. So I worry for the short term that there's just going to be much more turmoil and more pain and dislocation in the job market than we otherwise would have. Longer term, I'm even more worried. The AI is going to get better. It's going to take time, but it's going to get better. And the variety of jobs that it will displace will continue to grow. Um, I had this conversation with somebody who was saying, "Well, AI is great. It's gonna free up the thinking class. It can think great thoughts and come up with new technologies and move us forward." And that might all be true. But at the other end of the income distribution, that's where job losses are going to be really significant. And so my own view is that over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to have to start having more conversations along the lines of guaranteed minimum income. We're going to have more conversations about the government taking a bigger distributional role in the economy. right? Because if our economy, bifurcates in the way that I fear that it might, that will be very bad for growth. It'll be very good if you're in the top part of the income distribution, but bad things will happen if we continue to stagnate and even accelerate started that wrong. If we continue to stagnate wages at the bottom, or if wages at the bottom start to decline, that's not going to be good for the economy. It's not going to be good for society. That's a long-winded answer to say I'm very concerned about the effects of AI. Now, I use it in my classroom. I'm trying to teach my students how to use it in a way that just doesn't let them dumb themselves down, because there are very productive uses that can help in the classroom. But the inclination is, okay, how do I just make my life easier? And I don't think that that's good for a society that's already been, reducing the emphasis on education over the course of the last 40 to 45 years. All right, I'll get off my AI soapbox now. Let's see. Uh, Mary Elena, tell us more about the impacts of Fed administration anti-immigrant landscape on our local economy. Well, I was talking with Tara a little bit about this before we came on, who certainly has more insights for the local economy, but it does seem that there's increasing weakness in the presence of low-skilled workers, certainly of the unauthorized immigrant variety in the MBEP region. Tara, would you like to add to that?
I mean, yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this. I do think, to your point earlier about the first quarter and some of the farm jobs that appeared to be dropping off. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fear with the federal administration and the anti-immigrant landscape. I think has created some real tangible fear. We see this in our community in all three of our counties. The fear of deportation, the sweeps. There have been some sweeps already in our counties, probably not to the scale that we've seen in the media around what happened in LA. All that to say that it's going to have in our I really do think in our region, given that two of our three counties are major farm exporters, farming is a top one and two industries, that it will certainly have a direct sort of correlation and impact on our local economy. The numbers haven't quite rolled in as they should. As talking to some of our ag leaders, the tariffs will also, I think between the tariffs, which for one ag industry leader that I spoke to not too long ago, I think in the course of 2 days, they had like a $9 million loss over the temporary sort of tariff, and then the tariff was reversed. So there's that layer. On top of that, you have the layer of the immigration itself. People in our region, we have a very labor intensive crops with berries and leafy greens and others that need to be sort of picked by hand and is super labor intensive. All that to say that I think it is a real impact. Some of our small business owners who run, restaurants to, barber shops, a lot of I'm thinking right now, top of mind is a Pajaro Business Alliance and some of the work we've done in Pajaro on economic mobility strategies. We're hearing from our business groups on the ground that the number of folks coming in has dropped significantly because a lot of the business, a lot of the individuals frequenting those businesses may or may not be mixed status immigrant families. They may be undocumented families. There's a whole host of things. And we've seen what's happened, with folks, whether they're a citizen or non-citizen, like Senator Padilla and others. So there's just a real fear. I think between the uncertainty and fear, and when you mix the two together, it's just a very different dynamics.
Yeah, and so two more things on that. One, the number of southern border encounters has gone effectively to zero. Right. So people just aren't coming anymore. The word's gotten out about the environment here, so they're not coming anymore. And people who are, were before all this on the fence about being here versus being back in their home country, I think there have been an enormous number of self-deportations. We can see it in the aggregate national statistics that the size of the foreign-born population is declining in ways that are significantly measurable. So I think the strategy is working. Another point. So about tariffs, one that I haven't talked about a lot because economists don't think this way. This is more of sort of a business evaluation of tariffs than economic. And that is that an enormous number of importers are small businesses, right? And what a tariff does is it means that when you're going to import product, in order to get that product effectively into the United States and out of customs, you have to pay the tariff. So you pay the tariff well in advance of actually selling the product, right? And so that imposes sometimes an enormous cash flow problem on small businesses, right? And tariffs have that effect, can therefore have the effect of driving a lot of small importers just out of business, right? Which is a really unfortunate thing from the economy's perspective, not only for the individual businesses, but going forward, because if the tariffs then go away, well, those small businesses, they're gone. And they'll probably come back over time, but it is a longer term hit to the economy. My perspective is that if policies that hit in particular small businesses are probably the wrong policies.
And thanks for lifting that up because I just gave the example of a major ag producer in our region, but hearing from the smaller businesses, that's precisely what the issue is, the cash flow. Yep, they have to front money to import certain materials in order to execute on whatever product that, and there's quite a few in our region.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I agree. Thanks for lifting that up because it's small business and mid-sized businesses where I think they're impacted the most.
I think that's absolutely right. Um, let's see. If what direct correlation do you see in housing growth to local business job growth? Um, so in housing growth, I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to put together, good data on housing growth, and I really, really wanted to put that in this presentation, but I couldn't find anything that I was happy with, so I didn't. And that's going to mean I'm going to struggle with this question. But my sense is that there has not been a lot of housing growth. More housing has come available, but it's in again, the 25 to $75,000 income housing type range, and that's not going to satisfy people at the higher end. The growth in housing, which is slow, I think, is going to slow jobs. It's going to slow population growth, and it's going to slow job increases.
If I could take
Um,
a stab at that one, only because we do run the Monterey Bay Housing Trust out of the out of MVEP. So just a little bit insight, taking a step back, the Monterey Bay Housing Trust was established roughly 10 years ago to provide pre-development loans for housing projects, because part of what we know is that sometimes some of these projects die on the vine, for lack of better words, related to permitting time, to getting the right capital in place, or having some bridge loans and gaps. So we were able to raise about 1.5 million, and not, it doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. We match it with the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, where they do a 4-to-1 match. In the last decade, we've been able to help create in all three of, I would say largely 2 out of the 3 counties. We've got a project in the 3rd county right now in the pipeline, about 1,100 units. 1,100 over the course of a decade doesn't sound like a whole lot. But so to answer to that question, yes, there's, I think, a correlation between job growth and housing, and we're just so woefully undersupplied, unfortunately, that yes, we have really good sort of pipeline beginning to I think pick back up post-pandemic, but the time from which you get a good project, a developer ready to go with the right capital, and shovel on the ground and then have units open up, there's a significant time that folks don't always understand, and it's just tough. It's not producing as fast as we would like. All that to say, again, 1.5 million leveraged into now, since then 32 million has been revolved around a couple of times with our partner in Silicon Valley, but we have close to 13 projects that went live that have since opened up, but 1,100 units. That's an incremental slow
yeah,
drip into the
yeah,
bucket.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I'm on the planning commission up here in San Rafael, and you mentioned dying on the vine, and we get great projects, big projects that would increase the supply of housing. And given the current environment, it's hard to line up the capital. It's hard to put all the ducks in a row to actually start digging.
exactly.
Let's see. Are remote jobs, people working here, living elsewhere, or vice versa, captured in your data? Is there an expected trend for remote jobs in the future? That's a really good question. And I apologize for, I do have some data on that. It's dated, we'll go back to 2023. I don't know it off the top of my head about inflows and outflows from the MBEP region. Stay tuned. Hopefully, Tara will invite me back next May. I promise I'll have data on that next May.
Sounds good. That is good information to know. To Melissa's question about should there be raids and activity in our region, um, how can we prevent that? I don't think any of us really have an answer to that so much. I do encourage um, small, medium, large business, all businesses, I think should know what their rights are when ICE does come knocking on your door. We have a bunch of resources on our website. We've also sent them out in our most recent newsletter. Happy to reshare. I think whether you're a resident who gets a knock on your door or pulled over as you're driving, or you're a business with employees and that there's an knock on your door, I think everyone should be sort of armed with the information what your rights are. What are you allowed to share and not share? What are they supposed to present? I know we've seen all sorts of stories across the nation of the various processes. So they don't always follow process, but I think we need to be informed. And then for those of you, and I noticed there was quite a few who are with chambers and with business associations, I think it's really important to share that information with the business owners so they know what to expect if somebody shows up at their business door. And advocacy, I think, for those of you who know, I mean, I'm a strong proponent of continuing to advocate, call your elected officials, especially our federal, Senate, and representatives. I think exercising our civic sort of duty in that space also is really important, especially if you're seeing or hearing things in your community.
Yeah, 100%. Make noise.
Like noise.
I like making noise is a little bit more dangerous than it used to be, but
Are very important though.
we got to be brave and make noise because this is not good.
No, not at all. Agreed. Jessica just dropped some of the resources in the chat. Please do take advantage of that and stay tuned. We will be hosting both a housing summit in the fall as well as our annual State of the Region in October. So stay tuned for that information. Dr. Haveman, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you and be in your company. Thank you for taking the time to be with us in the Monterey Bay region.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.